Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrived by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 239, we sit down with Allan Wexler, an artist whose work exists at the intersection of art, architecture, design, and everyday life. Raised in Connecticut, Allan developed an early fascination with the built environment and the ordinary objects that shape our daily routines. Over the course of a career spanning more than 5 decades, he has created sculptures, installations, and conceptual works that challenge the boundaries between art and function. Working with familiar materials and domestic forms, Allan transforms furniture, tools, and everyday spaces into thought-provoking works that ask us to reconsider how we live and interact with the world around us. His work has been exhibited internationally and is represented in numerous museums and public collections, earning a recognition for its unique blend of artistic vision and practical design. Now a longtime resident of the North Fork, Allan reflects on the experiences that shaped his creative life, the evolution of his work, and the changes he has witnessed on the East End over the years. Through this conversation, we explore not only his artistic career, but a lifetime spent observing, building, and reimagining the space we inhabit. So I hope you enjoy episode 239 with Allan Wexler. This episode was recorded June 17th, 2026. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really great to have you on today.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
And so in the beginning, with a lot of these interviews, I usually like to talk a little bit about your ancestry or your family's background. Mm-hmm. But could you tell us where you grew up?
Yes, I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, across the Sound. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to come out to the North Fork, because I loved the beach growing up. And we'd go to the beach almost every day. We weren't on the beach. And my mother would pray for rain so she didn't have to schlep us to the beach during the summer. But we basically lived on the beach. So I needed salt water. It was in my blood. Okay. And so that's how we came here. But I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Okay. My father was a professional photographer, and my mother was a receptionist for a podiatrist. It's a little bit of my background. But they were very encouraging in terms of my making. I always made things as a child. Mm-hmm. I liked working with my hands.
And was that something going into school, whether middle school or high school, that you were interested in the arts?
Well, it's interesting because I was always, quote, destined to be, to go into college and become a scientist. Okay. And I did really like chemistry and physics. But my older brother convinced me that I should think about a field like architecture because he knew I liked making things. And in fact, in grammar school, we had a class called manual training. This was only for boys, which was a woodworking class. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. And I couldn't wait for that day to take that woodworking class. But I must say it was weird because I was a little embarrassed to admit that I really liked woodworking, because that was for kids who were not necessarily college bound. Mm. And I was destined to go to college. But my real heart was in working with my hands and making things.
Were there any other particular people or places, experiences when you were young that encouraged your creativity or shaped the way you see the world?
Well, I think mostly it was, borrowing my grandfather's toolbox. They lived on the second floor. We lived on the first floor. My aunt and uncle lived on the third floor, kind of a lower middle class neighborhood in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. But I would borrow his hammer and saw and go out to the backyard And my uncle owned a produce store in Bridgeport, and he would give me the old fruit crates, and I would make things out of the crates. And I don't think anything's changed today. I'm still in the wood shop building sculpture
Yes.
today. So was I encouraged? I never actually took an art class until my senior year in high school, when I said, I think I don't want to go into the sciences. I want to study architecture. And I was looking at places like RISD and Pratt Institute to study. And I said, maybe I should drop my German class in senior year and take an art class. So that was the first art class I ever took.
Wow.
Senior year of high school.
So just before that, you were just making things out of these objects?
On the side, yeah.
Yes.
As a 13-year-old, I built a flat-bottom canoe. I had a subscription to Popular Science or Popular Mechanics. It was a magazine. And there was a article about build your own flat-bottom canoe. And I was a 13-year-old, and I didn't have many tools, so I borrowed some tools from my friend's father and built this canoe in the basement of our place in Connecticut.
And where did you end up going after high school?
So I really wanted to go to Pratt Institute, but I got more money, scholarship money, from Rhode Island School of Design. So I ended up going to Rhode Island School of Design. And coincidentally, I'm back teaching at Pratt Institute as we speak.
Yes.
I taught architecture for many years at Pratt Institute, for 12 years, and then I went to Parsons and taught architecture, product design, and interior design. Although I practice as a fine artist, Pratt didn't offer me as much money, and I wanted to be in the city. But I went to RISD, and that's where I met my wife, and we've been married many years.
Okay. Nice. And how was that overall experience in Providence and going to RISD? What year was that?
1967, I graduated from high school.
Okay.
And then through 71, architecture was a 5-year program, so I think I graduated in 72. And I was a very good high school student, which means I memorized facts, but I couldn't think on my feet. And I had not a very good high school education. You know, it was basically, it always scared me if I had to write an essay and use my own thinking. And I think that's why I became a teacher, because I didn't have a very good experience in high school. All I did is memorize facts, and I didn't learn how to be experimental, how to think on my feet, how to voice my own opinions. And so after I graduated college and worked as an urban designer for the Department of Highways, which is, at RISD, I became more interested in urban scale projects. And my first job I got through the New York Times. There was an advertisement in the New York Times. This was probably the second year I had already graduated college, and there was an advertisement for a new school of architecture. They were looking for faculty. This is way before the internet.
Yes.
So it was the New York Times had classified section, and on a whim I applied for a teaching job, and I got the teaching job at New Jersey Institute of Technology, where I was for 12 years. And then I moved to Parsons School of Design after that. Okay. But I've always been passionate as a teacher and an educator. And I am now teaching. I was teaching studio classes, which was 2 days a week, 6 hours each day. I wanted to reduce my load, but I didn't want to retire. So I am now teaching an elective each semester, which is 3 hours a week.
But you got the job in the New York City area. That was in like the early 70s?
Yes, it was 1976.
Okay.
Maybe 74, I think, when I got my first teaching job. So it was a few years after I graduated, and after I was working for the Department of Highways as an urban designer. So then I got the job teaching as a full-time professor, and that was in Newark, New Jersey. So I could take the PATH train, because we were living in the West Village at the time, in New York City.
What did you think of, just because your interest in urban design, and there was a lot of urban renewal going on in New York City, I guess in the 50s and 60s too, but what did you think of the city at that time?
Well, I was really drawn to New York City.
Hmm.
I really wanted to live in New York. I was excited about it. And the city at that time was vibrant and edgy and we had a small apartment, and I had a corner which was my studio of the apartment
Hmm.
on the third floor of the building. But I always had the interest in continuing to work, so I would work for the Department of Highways, and then I would clock in every evening and work on my own projects. But
Okay.
I got interested in urban scale at Rhode Island School of Design because I was more interested in the urban scale, rethinking how people can come together and create community within big cities. And my final thesis project at RISD was for a competition I entered called "The City as a Significant Environment," and it was an urban design magazine called Casabella Magazine. It was an Italian
Mm.
magazine. I entered and won one of the first place prize winners, which was a project that used and this was my final thesis at RISD, using billboards in Providence to help people understand their local community,
Hmm.
which came from my interest and my reading of Marshall McLuhan, who talked about the idea of a global village,
Hmm.
and the idea of photography as a way for people to understand their local environment through photography rather than the actual physicality of being in a space. By abstracting into two dimensions,
Hmm.
you could understand more clearly the urban life. And
Hmm.
so what I did is to do an archive of photographs that would be placed on billboards in Providence. This was all done through photo montage, and it was all hypothetical and speculative. And it was published in several magazines, my thesis project at that time. And it was it was just kind of really deadpan, black and white photographs at the scale of billboards of what it looks like behind the billboard, on the right of the billboard, the left of the billboard, and up and down. So I kind of archived a series of photographs of local billboards and documented the spaces around the billboards that would be then displaced onto the billboards. So you're in your
Okay.
community, you're submerged in the reality of an environment, but you're seeing your environment through a black and white photograph on a billboard, and that
Mm.
would make people more aware of their local environment
Hmm.
and the community. And then part of that was I was taking a class at RISD called a silk screening class,
Hmm.
and I made a T-shirt. This is before T-shirts had any advertising on them. This was in the probably 71, I guess,
Okay.
1971, and there was no advertising on T-shirts or images. And I silk screened it kind of almost like an application. It said name, birthplace, hobbies, and various statistics on a T-shirt, and then with a laundry marker I could fill it in. So for name, Allan Wexler, birthplace, Bridgeport, Connecticut, hobbies, photography. The idea being that if people wear these t-shirts in an urban space, you create community because you might walk up to someone on the street on a corner in Manhattan, let's say 54th Street and
Hmm.
7th Avenue, and someone across the street is wearing a t-shirt that says they grew up in Bridgeport. You would cross the street and
Yes.
say, well, let's have a coffee and talk. So
Yes.
it's a way of community. And it was recently reposted on Instagram, and it said, "The man who invented social media through a t-shirt." so,
Wow.
so
No,
I
that's
think I
really
was the
cool.
inventor of Facebook.
Yes.
I didn't quite make as much as Zuckerberg did. But
Wow.
so those are the kind of interests that I had, and I think I owe
Yeah.
a lot of that to Marshall McLuhan's book, Understanding Media.
Mm. Yes. I was going to ask, I guess for people that might not be familiar with your work and what you're doing now, could you describe what you do as an artist now?
Sure. Right now, I've been collaborating with a friend who is an architect, very, very good architect, and he's younger than me. And his name is Michael Urinsky, and he
Mm.
actually has an apartment over in Southold,
Mm.
and he's here occasionally. And together, we're working on a book called The New Futurist Cookbook, and a little background material on futurism, which was a movement during World War One, in a group of young Italian artists
Mm-hmm.
who were bad boy artists and they were fascists, and they loved the idea of noise and war and electricity, and I would say they were the equivalent to Impressionism, which were artists who looked at nature and landscape in a kind of impressionist way.
Mm-hmm.
The futurists looked at urban life. And I was attracted to their manifestos, and there were several manifestos on futurist paintings, futurist sculpture, architecture, the art of noises. And they were in 1932, post-futurists,
Mm-hmm.
the spearheaded poet of the futurists, Marinetti, published a book called the Futurist Cookbook,
Mm-hmm.
which were absurd dinners, proposals for dinners. He felt that Italians were lethargic because they ate too much pasta.
Yeah.
There was great humor in the work, and I was given a grant by an organization to think about the future, and I quote misunderstood the idea of future with futurism, and I said I want to reinvent and redo the Futurist Cookbook in a contemporary way, because a lot of the work I'd done had to do with eating, sleeping, or bathing. So part of my background material, coming at fine art through the field of architecture and function, I was interested in how people come together around a table, the use of utensils as media. And so right now with Michael, we've been staging, we're doing our 9th Futurist dinner.
Mm.
We did one last year on Peter Trieber's farm.
Yes.
Peter's also an artist. And we collaborate with Peter, and between 2 rows of apple trees on his farm, Michael and I excavated 2 30-foot long troughs with a kind of earth bench in the trough, and we had a chef from Brooklyn prepare food that was locally sourced from the North Fork, and a lot of it from Peter's farm. And we did a project called Farm is Table, and we had really good photographs, and it was done. We placed it on Instagram, and immediately went viral. We got millions of views and feedback from that. So we're now on our 9th dinner, which we're doing with 4 dancers. And in fact, this evening I'm going to Watermill Center because Catherine Kirk, who is a dancer with Trish Brown Company, is doing she's in residence there, and she's going to work with us to stage a dance. And I'm building furniture and situations where the furniture will make drawings on the ground. As the dancers move the furniture and the utensils and coffee cups on a table, they'll make drawings and mark the movement of the dancers. So it's about the community of 4 people coming together around a table, sitting, having a meal together, or maybe just drinking coffee. It's still up in the air as to how elaborate this dinner wants to be. But I've been building in my studio this table, which will have a roll of paper, almost like a Torah scroll on each side, and the paper will roll to the next piece. So during the meal, it might be a dinner in 4 courses, and it will wind up, and then there'll be a clear table, white table, and then the utensils will make drawings on the table. And also the floor has a large scroll that goes under the dancers' feet and under the furniture. So as people move the chairs around, the chairs will make drawings on the floor. And the way it's done is very simple. I've done this before. I drill holes in the legs of the furniture and then place graphite stick in the leg with a spring behind it. So when you sit down, the graphite retracts, or the pencil retracts into the leg of the furniture. And when you move a chair, you lift it slightly. And when you move it to move away, it will make a drawing in graphite on the floor. And that will be recorded on a continuous scroll.
Yes.
So it's still up in the air. It's work. That's what I'm doing as we speak. Like yesterday at 5:00, I was working on this project.
Wow.
And I'll go back this afternoon and continue working on it.
Yes. But you said you've done 8 of these?
Well, so far we've done 8 futurist dinners.
Futurist dinners.
One was a dinner at a light table. I had an exhibition at my gallery, Jane Lombard Gallery in New York City, in Tribeca, and it was a one-person exhibition. And one of the pieces in the show was called Light Table. And actually, that's an interesting local story because I would go to the local dump in Cutchogue. Most of you know Cutchogue and the local dump, and they have a recycling center, which I think is great because keeping anything out of the landfill is a great thing. And I would mine the collection of glassware every weekend that it was open and collect glassware. And I made a table where the glass dinnerware, bowls and cups and wine glasses, were flush with the top of the table. And under the table were light sources. So the dinnerware was illuminated from underneath. And we had a Vietnamese chef prepare a transparent and translucent meal, which I ate at the gallery for one of our 10 futurist dinners. So all of these are being documented for a book which will be published next March called The New Futurist Cookbook, published by the very good publisher who published my last monograph called Absurd Thinking Between Art and Design, which I hope you have a copy of. If not, I will give you a copy.
Yes, I'm not. I have to double check.
It would be good for you to have a copy. I think I donated one when Poppy was here.
Okay.
Because I did a book launch here.
Okay.
When Poppy Johnson was a librarian here at the Greenport Library.
Yes.
And that was in 2017 or 18 that book came out.
Okay.
So it's a pretty comprehensive collection of my past work. But this will be a new book published by the same person.
Wow.
By the same publisher.
And you mentioned Marshall McLuhan, but were you ever interested in the theater of the absurd?
Not as much as I would like to be.
Okay.
You know, Artaud, is that right? And
Artaud and Ionesco.
Yeah, I do love that kind of theater, but I'm not educated very well in that area.
Okay.
But now that you bring it up, I'm going to look into it more deeply. I think that would be really interesting.
Yes.
To look into that more deeply because there is, because idea of absurdity is something that's really important to me as an artist. Because as Albert Einstein said, if an idea is not absurd, there's no use for it. So even on the edge of science, and science and art are dialectically inverted with each other, but there's a vibration between the two. The way we work as artists is not unlike the way, scientists work. We play around with things. We mess around with the world. We are playful, irreverent. We take risks. We try to be provocative and bad and experimental. And I think a good scientist doesn't quite know where they're going, but they have an urge to move forward. So if I know too well what a work will become at the end of a process, it's not very good. So it's always like I have the urge to make something and I think it's going in the right direction, but I'm never sure. And I let my hands and the construction of things do the thinking for me. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, definitely. But yeah, just looking at some of your sculptures and objects and how you transform those, you go into the process pretty open in terms of the final outcome. Is that that's what you were kind of saying?
Yeah, often. I mean, sometimes like Michael gives me a prompt. He said, let's do our 10th meal, which is based on smell. And I had done a project that probably gave him the concept, which was a project which is called a spice box. In Judaism, which was my background, and I grew up in an Orthodox family, so the tradition and a lot of the rituals is something that I try to keep. But I have done several pieces that relate to my past, one of which was called the spice box. And there's a ceremony in Judaism called Havdalah, which is at the end of the Sabbath, just before sundown, right at sundown on Saturday evening. It's difficult transition to go from the Sabbath to the work week, And so to make and ease that transition from the sacred to the profane, Jews had invented this ritual called Havdalah, which is you pass around in the synagogue this spice box. And it's usually very beautiful sterling silver container, which has little perforations on it that are decorative. And in that spice box, they put cinnamon and cloves and orange peel, and it has a wonderful smell. And it's the smell that is transcendent. And so I did a riff on that, where I did a do-it-yourself spice box, and I have like clear vinyl tubing that goes to spices that come directly from the supermarket. And I would drill holes in the caps and then put these plastic tubes, and then it would go to a face mask, and you would wear it. And they had little valves, and they all went to the same face mask, like 10 different bottles of spices. And they'd all go to the same face mask, and each one had a little valve on it that you can shut off the smell, and you can control what you want to smell at the time. So it's a little bit of riff. So we're doing a meal which is based on smell. And Michael knows a chef from Finland who's very excited about working with us on this project. And he's going to prepare a very bland meal, all white.
Yes.
And we're going to have a mask that doesn't cover your mouth, but will cover your nose and maybe your eyes. And so the smell, because so much of eating is smell-based, so we can isolate the smell with the white food. And it's all white food. And I'm thinking of also having like filters that will go in front of your face so you could turn the food into green or red or purple, almost in a theatrical way. Yes. So that'll be our last dinner before we
book launch.
Before we continue working in InDesign to put the book together and then send it.
No, but actually, I wanted to go back to your time in New York in the mid to late 70s, because you were working at Parsons. I was just curious, with your artwork at that time, what did you think of the art scene at that time in New York and getting involved with other artists and showing your work?
So I guess it was the early 80s or the 70s when I was in New York.
Yes.
It's an interesting story because I studied architecture and I thought of myself as an architect at the time, doing experimental architecture.
You wouldn't call yourself an artist at that?
No, I didn't call myself an artist then. But there was a movement called paper architecture. And other people called it non-architecture, de-architecture, anti-architecture. And it happened simultaneously with the Vietnam War. And I think it was a reaction. We were very proactive in terms of an anti-war movement when I was a student at RISD. And I think out of that movement, architects felt that building more buildings and filling up the world with more stuff wasn't really going to change politics and wasn't going to change the world. But we could use architecture as a language that would politically change the world without having to construct more buildings. And that became a movement where through drawings and models, you could make proposals for buildings that would be as influential as an actual building could be. This was in the early 70s and late 60s. I was, through a few faculty who were encouraging to this kind of way I was thinking at that time, was interested in kind of that non-architecture movement, speculative architecture. But I thought of myself as an architect experimenting with the language of architecture, the media of architecture. And when I came out of school and worked as an urban designer, as a kind of alternative practice, but always maintained my private work in the evenings and weekends, I always went to galleries in New York City. At that time, the galleries were more limited. I had like 20 galleries. Every 5 weeks, I would go to new shows. I would see all the work in various galleries and very influenced by, Andy Warhol and Joseph Beuys and, artists whose work was very socially engaged work. And, people who work, with Warhol experimenting with mass production, one of a kind. Joseph Beuys was interested in social sculpture, how people can come together through brainstorming and action and politics. And one of the stops along the way was always Ronald Feldman Gallery. And Ron Feldman was probably the first gallerist who really experimented with people who who crossed boundaries, I think. I think he invented the idea of artists crossing boundaries. And he liked my work because I thought of myself as an architect, but it was looking at architecture from an artistic point of view. So he took me on as a member of his gallery, where I had 10 solo exhibitions over the course of like 30 or 40 years.
Wow.
And then when he died and his family didn't want to continue the gallery, I then moved on to Jane Lombard Gallery, who's also very experimental and edgy and represents some really, really interesting people. So I'm really thrilled that I have this new gallery, and they're very proactive. And in fact, I'm the next show, they're doing a summer show. The concept is the beach, or it's called The Immensity of Blue, and it's all people in the gallery, like 4 or 5 of us, whose work has to do with summer and beach. This is also relates to the North Fork, or at least the South Fork. Guildhall, about I think 2 summers ago, did a project called East Meets West, and they had East End artists teamed up with an artist from LA. So I was assigned an artist in LA who is of Japanese heritage, and he lives in LA, and he's a performance artist and a storyteller. And he sent me a video prompt. And from that prompt, I built this thing that got washed ashore on the Pacific Ocean, and I rebuilt it and created a kit of rakes that could rake the sand. So in East Hampton, at the beach in East Hampton, I opened this kit. This was a performance one evening at the beach through Guildhall. And let me see if I get this story straight. If you're familiar with the Japanese dry garden, like Ryo-Anji, the Japanese dry garden is a Zen garden. And in the Zen garden, there are clusters of rocks that are within a field, and Zen monks rake the sand as a form of meditation. There are obstructions in the sand, which are these rocks, so they have to rake around the rock, and the dilemma is you enter the sand, and how do you rake without your footprints and interfering with the meditation and the raking? So I did a similar project on the beach, but instead of using rocks as quote obstructions in the field, I placed a blue beach chair, a blue cooler, and a blue towel in the sand, and then I unraveled this canvas bag which had all these parts, and I assembled a rake, and then I raked the sand in concentric rings around each of these and then exited the square. So I'm building a fragment of that for the gallery, and then there'll be documentation of that in the show. So, but that's a kind of interesting project for the East End, East End artists.
Yes.
And then the following year, I shipped my bag of rakes to Dan, and he then did a performance using my rake kit. So that was an interesting project, but that's happening. I'm dropping off and assembling this next week at the gallery. It will open next Friday.
But that will be a fragment of
It's a fragment. It's a 6-foot square fragment, but it will have the rake kit and documentation in the space. So it's a 6-foot by 6-foot square. It's like a sandbox, but I've cut the furniture so it feels like it extends into infinity, even though it's been. So it's a new project, but based on that project.
But looking at some of your other works and sculptures, do you like working outside of the gallery space and more within the public space, or like an installation outside?
Well, I love the idea of the gallery. For me, it's a laboratory. It's a white box. It's a neutral space, and you're working in the complexity of your studio and removing the work and placing it in a new context and juxtaposing one project which is in storage with another project, an earlier project with a new project. It creates a dialogue, and it's a way of looking at your work more clearly. So it's a kind of, it's, for me, the gallery is a laboratory, and it's a sterile environment for that reason, because it's neutral, so that what you bring into it affects the environment and affects the way you look at your own work. And of course, it's important to get the, outsiders see your work, because art can be a lonely process. So, you do want everyone needs that kind of feeling of recognition from outside source. So, yeah. So,
yes. Also, just thinking of your work, and we've talked about sculpture, architecture, and the functional design, but you've kind of, within those categories, you kind of resist fitting into those, kind of working across all of those and blurring the line there. What do you think in terms of just within today's society? Because I feel like the world today is kind of absurd, and just thinking outside the box, thinking in a different way, making people think differently. I think that's also what you've touched on in your artwork as well.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, I was just invited to be a speaker at a conference in California, which is, I think it's all architects and designers, and they've asked me to speak as one of the out-of-the-box thinkers within that field.
Yes.
So these are very high-end architects and designers who are extremely well established with large firms, and then I've been asked as an individual artist to speak. So that's kind of the exciting for me to be the outsider insider in that situation. But often, my work is appreciated within the field of art and design, architecture and design. It's appreciated within the field of art, but I think coming at this field, and I always said that for me, architecture and design, for me, is media that I experiment with. And I don't pretend to be an architect anymore. I did in the beginning, but it took me 40 years to realize I'm not an architect. I'm a fine artist. The media I work with is architecture. I don't think that answers your question.
No, no, that's interesting. What are some things you're hoping when you're creating these works, and people, whether they interact with them or come into viewing them, what do you hope people take away from some of your works? And then do you leave it open to, are you happy when people kind of come up with their own interpretation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's most important to me. But I'm hoping that my work, and I know sometimes artists think it's pejorative to use the word didactic, but I think good artwork does teach, and it reveals what is out in the real world, and it helps people look more closely at the world around them. So I'm hoping that through my work, people look at the insignificant details in their everyday life, whether it's in the morning turning a valve on in your bathroom sink and understanding the awesomeness of that magic that will take water from the earth and deliver it to you for human use. So looking at insignificant details, the head of a sheetrock screw for me is a great moment in life.
Yes.
And so looking at the ordinary, everyday, minute details brings theater to everyone. And it doesn't require lots of, expensive tickets to go to Broadway shows. Theater is around us, and I think it's the artists who help reveal these issues in life that are, in most people might consider them insignificant, but that's what really drives us and makes us human. And I'm hoping that my work does make people appreciate their own lives. So the work you see in a gallery or in a publication is a trigger for other people to say, oh, I never realized that when I move my chair around, it's making this invisible drawing on the floor, and it's marking time.
Yes.
And I think that's, for me, what it's about. But I'm not the first person. Marcel Duchamp made us look at the world around us, at the insignificant details of a urinal or a bicycle wheel, and see beauty in the most ordinary things that you would see in a plumbing shop window. So I'm very influenced by Marcel Duchamp,
Yes.
as you probably realize. I think he screwed me up when I discovered his work. I said, "Ooh, this is a lot more interesting than mainstream architecture."
But also looking at your work over the years, what do you think of your work from your early days at RISD and what you're doing now, and how it's evolved or changed?
Yeah, I'm hoping it's evolved.
Yeah.
But that's the fear of all artists, that the new work you're doing is not as good as the work you did last year. And it's always a struggle, and it's exciting because you're pushing yourself, but you want the new work to be more prominent. But I look back at my work I did at RISD as a student and look at it very positively and think of it as maybe better than the work I'm doing today. I'm hoping it's not true.
Yes.
But when I think about that t-shirt I did, that was pretty revolutionary back then, or the Billboard project, as I mentioned before, or other projects. I did a mechanical museum for the Rhode Island School of Design Museum because they were very close to the community. They didn't have an outreach program at the museum that we now have today. They weren't interested in the general public coming to the museum. It was more about the wealthy patrons of the museum. That's who they were really concerned about. And I was trying to undermine that idea that let's break the walls of the museum down by vending art in vending machines and distributing vending machines throughout the city of Providence, Rhode Island. And that was tongue-in-cheek, but it was very serious tongue-in-cheek because I was trying to push the museum to think about community and about outreach. It's what you guys do at the Greenport Library so beautifully, bringing the community in. I think the libraries are an amazing institution.
Yes.
I just heard a podcast about Carnegie and what an amazing philanthropist he was, and started the whole idea of public libraries. It's, if I can leave behind a legacy like Carnegie, that would be pretty good.
Yes. And also, you mentioned some of your projects and exhibitions, but just looking back over your career, is there a particular project that you feel was a turning point for you as an artist?
Yes. There are a few, but probably the most crucial was when I first came out of school and I was starting to experiment, and I was experimenting with more form-driven architectural spaces, and I created what I call a miniature lumberyard. And I was looking at Zen Buddhism and stream of consciousness, and I said, how could I make architecture in a way that is mindless, that is subconscious? I equated, could you make architecture like a potter throws a pot on a wheel, and there's a confusion as to whether the hands are making the pot or the pot is making the hands. That ambiguity between the making and the building. And because buildings are so big scale, how could you work in a stream of consciousness fashion? So to do that, I made a miniature lumberyard. I make miniature 2x4s, miniature plywood, sheets of glass, slabs of concrete, and I would mindlessly construct these small buildings. And they were, visually really innovative. But at one point, I made a miniature chair, and I made a quantity of them. And I started using the chair in these small structures that I built. And that was a turning point because the chair for me represented human use, because you project your mind into sitting in that chair, and it became my definition of ritual and ceremony. And through that, I became interested in the Japanese tea ceremony.
Yes.
And issues like that. And that led to a whole series of projects, one of which has gotten a huge amount of press, called Coffee Seeks Its Own Level. And it's traveled around the world, that project, and it's been published all over the place, and not just art magazines, but science and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 4 coffee cups connected together with surgical tubing. And when one person lifts a cup before the other people, the coffee overflows.
Mm.
So it requires 4 people to come together to create a democratic, playing field and lift the cup simultaneously. Very influenced by a Japanese tea ceremony, but I couldn't very well use tea because I'm an American and coffee is my medium of choice.
Yes. Wow.
It's the
that's
most
really...
ordinary beverage, and it cuts through rich and poor. All
Yes.
people drink tea, whether you're rich or poor. It's democratic. It's like coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great equalizer. That's what I thought. And I did a whole series of projects using coffee as a kind of form of ritual and community.
Yes. And now over the years, you continued to work in New York City, but I was curious, you mentioned growing up in Bridgeport and talking about the North Fork, but when was the first time you had visited the North Fork?
I visited the North Fork through a friend, Leslie Weissman, who is the head of the Zoning Board of Appeals here in Southold Town.
Okay.
And she lived she had a house in Orient and invited us out to see, to come visit her. And we fell in love with the area instantly. It reminded me of the beaches in Bridgeport.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any children at the time. Oh, no, I had a baby, my daughter, who's now 47. And so we came out with Bethany and, went to visit Leslie and fell in love with the area. And we rented a small cottage on an inlet in Mattatuck. And then the owner of the cottage was selling his mother's house, who had died a few years before. And we bought that house in Mattatuck. And we lived there and raised my 2 daughters every summer. We would pack up our car and drive out after the last day of school and spend the whole summer. And the first day of school, we'd return to New York City.
Okay.
But it was interesting back then because I actually would take apart my table saw and put it in the car, and then had a rooftop carrier with all my supplies. And I moved my whole studio from New York to a 2-car garage in Mattatuck. And then finally I bought a second table so I got to schlep. But I remember those pilgrimages, but it was wonderful, ritual. And the kids grew up together. We refused to get we didn't want a television. The kids didn't even want a television. They played together, projects together. They worked in my studio in the summers. It was a great life coming out. And then in 2001, my wife and I bought 4 acres of woods in Southold and built, there was a small cottage on the property, which we renovated and spent 4 summers in a cottage while we were building a studio on the property. And then a few years after that, we built a year-round house.
Wow.
So, which is where our primary residence.
And you designed the house?
Yes, I designed the house and did a lot of the construction myself.
Wow. How was that process for you because did you ever get the opportunity to just fully design a house at that point?
I did some additions for people
when
I thought of myself and practiced a little bit, but doing the house for ourselves was really exciting. And then I said, well, maybe I should have been a contractor because I really loved it. It was stressful. And I think contractors deserve all the money they get because aligning subcontractors is very stressful and getting building permits and all of that. And, but I really enjoyed the construction and physically building the whole interior. We had a builder do the whole frame and the outside and put the windows in and most of the, and hired plumbers and electricians and things like that. But I did all the cabinet work and the woodwork and the door hanging and all of the construction. So that was it was like 2 years of physical labor, but I really enjoyed it.
Creating your own sculpture.
Yeah, it is. It's quite sculptural, the house. And there's a lot of, ideas of, of energy conservation and solar collection and all of that is very important. Because we didn't want to spend a lot of money on fuel. So we allow the sun to help us out a lot in that house. Whereas a studio, when I built it, I was less concerned about the heat and the air conditioning, because at that time we thought of the studio as mostly a summer studio. And now that we're here most of the time, it's a bit of a heat drain because I have 3 large overhead doors because I can open it up in the summer to the outside and to the woods. But it's a big heat loss, so I had to make storm doors. When we spent most of our time out here during COVID,
Yes.
we realized that we were spending a lot of money on propane to heat the studio. So I built storm doors. So every fall, I put the storm doors on. That helps a little bit.
Yes. And you mentioned the one project out here at Treber's Farm, but does the North Fork inspire you in your artwork?
Yeah, actually, the very first project when we had this little cottage on the inlet in Mattituck, and my studio was the front porch.
Okay.
And I collected beach stones. And at the time, I was making these miniature buildings out of my miniature lumberyard. And using some of those miniature 2x4s, I started to encrust beach stones with these 2x4s. And so that was the earliest use of material from the North Fork. And I made a series of sculptures using beach stones and the miniature 2x4s, but then they became basically linear elements in contrast to the organics of a curvilinear form of a stone. And then they became a series of lamps using a bulb instead of beach stones, because I thought of myself still as a functional artist, using architecture as a language. And then over the years, I've worked with a lot of like natural elements from the North Fork, like trees that I've cut down and then turned into sculpture.
Okay.
So I have used material from the North Fork, but it has been an influence mostly because of the calmness of the space and and being in the woods and it's a form of retreat.
Yes.
From the hustle and bustle of New York City, which I continue to love, and we do have an apartment still.
Yes.
In Brooklyn. So we're there a few days a week, especially during the school year when I'm still teaching.
Yes. And being out here since the early 2000s, or was it the late 90s or early 2000s?
No, actually, we started coming out here in 1984. I think.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
But what do you think?
1979.
Oh,
I think
really?
we started coming out because my daughter was just born.
Oh, okay.
She was an infant when we came out. 1979.
Wow.
That's when we rented the place in Mattituck.
But what do you think of some of the changes on the North Fork and how it's evolved?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm on the Historic Preservation Commission in South Old Town because I felt I wanted to give back. And I do have an expertise in architecture and can offer some help. And, I'm interested in preserving the history of the North Fork. There's not a lot. So we need to protect our heritage. And so I'm all for that. But I also feel for the homeowners and how do you respectfully respect the past and allow people to move into the future? That's important to me as well. But can you repeat the question again?
Just what do you think of some of the changes?
Yeah, there's many changes. And I think the changes have been good for, the Greenport is I think it seems to be thriving. There's still a lot of empty storefronts. And I think it needs some innovation as to what can happen in those storefronts. But I'm happy to see a lot of change and activity because I think it's important to local people that they can have a source of income from people coming here as, day trippers or people who are purchasing second homes out here. So I think it has a very good thing. I hope it doesn't turn into the congestion of the South Fork. And I think we can learn a lot by seeing what other communities how other communities have developed, and to prevent ourselves from moving down a path that might not be as comfortable for local residents and some of the newer residents here. But I think it's for the better, I think. Yes. I think, we have some really good restaurants out here now in the North Fork. We can get a decent loaf of bread that we couldn't get when we first moved out here in the late 70s. But we also lost a lot. I remember doing school shopping in Riverhead for my kids when they went to school. We could do our school shop, clothing shopping.
Yes.
I don't see that much anymore.
No, a lot of
there
things.
was a shoe store in Riverhead, and but we've lost some of those things. And I know it's very hard for local younger families to move here because it's gotten so expensive. And definitely I feel, as most people do, that we need affordable housing, workforce housing, and we have to find innovative ways to accomplish that. And I think the town is really working hard to revamp the code to allow workforce housing and affordable housing out here on the North Fork. I think that's really important. We need young families out here again. Yeah. The schools are really, the enrollment in the local schools is really decreasing. And what will happen to those schools if we don't continue to bring younger people here?
Yes, you need
diversity.
Diversity, and otherwise it doesn't function throughout the year, or it's just for the summertime.
Yeah.
Only.
Right. It's really seasonal.
Yes.
Absolutely.
No, that's definitely changed. And there's probably similar things within New York City. Obviously, change in New York City and Brooklyn.
Yeah,
time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We owned a building in Chelsea.
Okay.
And during COVID, the area along 8th Avenue really, a lot of empty storefronts, and it was a little sad. So we sold that building. That was our income. We had tenants, and it was our income. As a way I could work as an artist and be able to survive in this climate and raise 2 children. And we sold that about 3 years ago and moved to an apartment in Brooklyn, which is now our, we're only there a few days a week. So we really call the North Fork our home, our primary residence.
Yes.
And it's where we vote. We're, try to be active in politics. I think it's important for us.
Yes. And I guess just moving forward, what keeps you connected to this place? And we talked about, I think, like your hopes for future generations and what they will appreciate about the area.
Well, hopefully preserving the climate out here, which is a big concern. Groundwater is in real danger of the saltwater encroaching on the aquifers. And I think, personally, people irrigate their lawns too much and pour chemicals into the lawn. I think that's something that has to stop. We're still using Roundup, which is carcinogenic, and it's used in all the farms. I mean, not the farms, but it's used to keep weeds down. What's wrong with weeds? I'm all for a rustic landscape. We have our landscape is very rustic and
doesn't need to be all
dry
manicured
right now, and we haven't had rain much. But I'm really concerned about the climate out here and lack of concern. And this obsession with lawns is, I don't know where that invention happened, the invention of the lawn, but I think it's total absurdity.
Suburbia.
So it might take some artists to do projects about lawns to get people enlightened about how you can have alternative ways of creating property and creating beauty in your landscape.
Yes. No, I've always been fascinated with suburbia and just the environment it creates out there.
Yeah.
And probably further, I wouldn't say the North Fork, but further west through all the middle of the island, just all of the design that was put into place or not put into place.
Yeah. Well, I actually I'm very familiar with Levittown, Long Island, and the various Levittowns in the country. William Levitt was an interesting innovator who created the idea of mass production housing, learning from Henry Ford and mass production. And not recently, but when I was teaching an architecture design studio, and I think it was Pratt Institute, and we did a studio based on the idea of Levittown, suburban life, and we took my students to Levittown to visit. We were looking for an empty lot, and we wanted to use that lot. How would you, in contemporary culture, create a house within a Levitt community that was both contextual and avant-garde and push the boundaries of what suburban life was like. But we went there, and people, thinking that the middle class suburbia would be, and people, it was around Halloween, and there was an amazing feeling of community. And there was not one home that looked like the original Levitt home. That was really a simple saltbox house that was an armature that he created that allowed people to add on and accrete after the soldiers came back from World War II in 1949. I think it was maybe earlier than 49, right after World War II. There was a real need for housing. And young families purchased a small house, and then slowly over time they had children. They turned the attic into a bedroom and bathroom up there, and it continued to grow and evolve. And when we got there, we found that it was a very diverse population. It was Halloween, it was very festive, and the students, from feeling before we got there a little facetious about the idea of suburbia, fell in love with it and developed some really interesting prototypes for what a new Levitt house might be. So the idea of Levittown was something that was important to me as a kind of, because I did a lot of projects using a series of Levitt plans where I would riff on them and make new drawings overlap with the existing plan of the house. So I did a whole study for half a year just experimenting with Levitt houses.
Okay.
And then I did a project for Habitat for Homeless, which was kind of reinvent the basic prototype for a habitat home.
That the Habitat for Humanity?
Habitat for Humanity, the Jimmy Carter invention, which was fantastic. And so I did a whole series of riffs on the standard habitat home and how all the possible variations that would allow alternative lifestyles to use those homes, whether it was a single parent or a lesbian couple or whatever, to create a different kind of house prototype that could happen. So I did a whole collection of, and inserted it into their existing catalog as a kind of idea.
Wow.
So I was very interested in the idea of early suburbia and what that meant, the invention of suburbia.
Yes.
And I think we can learn that for the housing on the North Fork as well. How we can take some of the experiences of those, which are not necessarily all negative, and some of the positive attributes of suburbia, and appropriate them here on the North Fork. I'm not sure if that's possible, but
without it becoming, I feel like without creating these giant subdivisions,
right,
and integrating it more into the hamlet.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's what I would think would be positive.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course the groundwater is always an issue out here because it's so fragile.
Yes.
So it's not so easy.
It's always a challenge. No, but I think usually, just lastly at the end, I usually just like to ask if there are any other last minute things you'd like to say or discuss that we haven't touched on.
No, I think this questioning of who I am and what my profession is, it's an issue that my wife has a problem with, because whenever I'm at a cocktail party, I don't know how to answer the question. Am I an artist? What's my media? Am I an architect? What kind of buildings do you build? So based on this confusion when I was at a cocktail party, what kind of work do you do for a living? My wife got angry, said, you need to have an elevator pitch. So is there an elevator pitch here? So what I did is I went back that next day to my studio and I wrote 20 calling cards, each of which is a definition of my profession. Can I read one of them?
Sure.
It's in my I carry them in my wallet. So when I'm at this awkward moment in a conversation and someone comes to me and says, what do you do for a living? I'll pull out a card and I'll read it. So this is one of 20.
Sure.
So this is Allan Wexler, cocktail party response number 14. What kind of work do you do? I'm an architect in an artist's body. My studio is a laboratory. I sculpt with gravity and heat. I paint with rain. I use everyday and ordinary activities, eating, sleeping, and bathing as media. I investigate the built environment archaeologically. My work looks at simple things. The sight line between two people sitting across from each other at a table, the many positions of two bricks in relationship to each other, how floor meets wall. My work defines habitable space and the wall that separates inside from outside. I invent ways to walk through walls. So that's response number 14.
Wow. No, that's great to have. Because I feel like it's not like you have to fit into a certain, you can work across all disciplines.
Yeah, and I like it that way.
Yeah.
It gets you into trouble.
Yeah.
Because you're often ignored because, well, he's not an architect, he's an artist. He's not an artist, he's an architect, that kind of thing. So I'm often ignored, but what can I do? I have no other choice.
Oh, you want to work in the way that you want to.
Yeah, and it's like I feel blessed that I have a studio and I can work every day. I'm in the studio and exciting to work. It's not always, not all the work is good, but when it's good, it's amazing. It's a great feeling.
Yes.
So I feel blessed that I have this way of retreating into the privacy of my own mind and hands. But my hands do the thinking for me.
Sometimes they'll decide what they want to do.
Yeah, hopefully, yes. When my mind takes over, it's not good.
But no, I want to thank you so much for
Chris.
Taking the time to come on today and share your story and all the work you're doing. And I look forward to seeing the future cookbook.
Yeah, we'll maybe do a book launch here.
Yes.
At the library. That would be really great.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds great.
Let's plan on that.
All right.
All right. Well, wonderful to meet you, Chris.
Nice to meet you.
I'm a real great admirer of the Greenport Library.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 239 with Allan Wexler. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.